Look, I've been covering this league long enough to build a pretty finely tuned nose for what a genuine rebuild actually smells like versus what a front office wants you to think one looks like. And right now, something happening out in Las Vegas is hitting different than anything I've picked up from that franchise in years. Not, oh wow, new era different. Not Super Bowl or bust different. Structurally, organizationally, from the ground up different. And honestly, a huge chunk of people outside of Raider Nation are still completely asleep on it. Hit that subscribe button if you're already feeling where this is going, because we're just getting started. Let me be straight with you before we go a single step further. I am not here to sell you a fairy tale. I've watched this organization chase big names like they were shopping for trophies instead of actually building something that lasts. I've seen them throw money around without any real philosophy behind it. I've watched them cycle through head coaches and starting quarterbacks at a rate that would send any sensible franchise into full-blown panic mode. But somehow, with the Raiders, it just became normal, expected even. I know exactly what a Raiders hype train looks like when it's running on nothing but fumes and wishful thinking. I've been burned by this organization enough times to carry some very real, very deep scar tissue. So when I tell you that what's quietly being assembled out in the desert right now genuinely feels different in a meaningful way, I need you to understand that's not me getting swept up in some off-season fever dream. That's me digging beneath the headlines, looking at the actual bones of what's being built, and seeing something I haven't seen from this franchise in a very long time. Something that actually connects. Something that makes sense from one end to the other. And if this kind of honest, no-fluff football analysis is what you're here for, smash that like button. It genuinely helps more than you probably realize, and we've got a lot more of this coming. Fernando Mendoza. That's the name sitting right at the center of all of it. And if you're not fully locked in on this story yet, let me be direct with you. It is time to pay attention. Not because the buzz is loud, buzz is cheap. Not because the fan base is buzzing with excitement, and excitement can be contagious, though it absolutely is right now. But because there are real, specific, football-grounded reasons to believe this organization has finally found something it's been missing for far too long. And Mendoza is the most concrete, most visible proof of that. He isn't just a quarterback prospect. He is evidence of a plan. Living, breathing evidence that for the first time in what feels like forever, there is an actual front office vision operating in Las Vegas. One that goes somewhere real, instead of just sounding inspirational in April and falling apart by October. Now, before we get fully into Mendoza, I want to talk AFC West first, because that's where this conversation gets both genuinely fascinating and demands some real, intellectual honesty from all of us. There's a take gaining serious traction right now that the Raiders finish in the top 2 of this division this season. And my honest, gut-level first reaction when I came across it? Measured skepticism. Not flat-out dismissal, measured skepticism. And there's a big difference. Because the AFC West is not some quiet neighborhood you just casually stroll into and start climbing the ladder because you had a halfway decent offseason. Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes, people. Let's not lose our minds. The Chiefs don't just quietly dissolve because another team finally got its roster construction right for one offseason. That's not how dynasties work. The Chargers have offensive firepower that makes defensive coordinators genuinely uncomfortable drawing up game plans. And the Broncos? Yeah, anyone still filing them under rebuilding hasn't been watching with honest eyes. This is a hard, nasty, competitive division with real threats at every spot in the standings. But, and this is the part I keep wrestling with every time I try to dismiss the top 2 idea. What Clint Kubach has put together on this roster isn't just active, it's intentional. There's a visible, traceable thread connecting every single decision. The draft philosophy flows into the free agency approach, which flows into the coaching hires, which flows into the developmental framework for young players. You can follow the logic from one end all the way to the other without losing the trail. You can see what kind of football team they're building toward. You can see what the finished product is supposed to look like. You can see the identity they're trying to carve out in a division that's been the personal property of one franchise for most of the last decade. And that kind of coherence? A front office cannot fake that through press conference language. It either shows up in the actual architecture of the roster, or it doesn't. Right now, in Las Vegas, it is showing up. And for this specific franchise, with its very specific recent history, that clarity of direction feels almost disorienting in the absolute best possible way. Drop a comment below. Do you think the Raiders can crack the top 2 in the AFC West this season? I genuinely want to know where you're at on this. Do I think the Raiders win the AFC West outright? No, I'm not going to tell you something I don't actually believe just to make myself sound bold. But finishing second? Being the team that makes Mahomes actually earn it instead of handing him a comfortable Sunday afternoon? Competing in every game through December instead of quietly fading into irrelevance once the weather turns cold? That is absolutely within real reach. And reaching for that standard, even falling slightly short of it, represents a level of organizational progress this franchise has been genuinely incapable of producing on any kind of consistent basis for far, far too long. Now let's slow down and properly sit with the Mendoza question, because this is where the conversation gets its most complicated and its most interesting at the exact same time. The idea that Fernando Mendoza starts weak. One has a ton of emotional energy swirling around it right now, and honestly, I completely understand the psychology driving it. When a fan base has watched its franchise cycle through quarterback after quarterback, each one arriving with some polished version of the same big promise, and most of them delivering some depressingly familiar version of the same letdown, and then something genuinely, unmistakably different walks through the door. The urge to want him out there immediately is not irrational. It is completely human. I feel the pull of it myself when I watch what Mendoza brings to this organization and try to picture what it looks like, operating at full speed on a Sunday in January. But I have to be honest. With you, my read is that Mendoza does not start Week 1. And more importantly, I don't think he should, unless training camp produces something so unambiguous, so undeniable that the coaching staff simply has no legitimate choice left on the table. Kubach has been pretty direct about this. He's stated plainly that the competition will be settled in camp and preseason, that no outcome has been predetermined, that the starting job gets earned on the field, not handed out in a conference room. And that framing isn't PR spin, that's smart, disciplined organizational behavior that reflects a genuine understanding of how young quarterbacks develop and how you protect a long-term investment without abandoning your short-term competitive goals in the process. Kurt Cousins is in this building for reasons that go a lot deeper than just filling a roster spot and collecting a paycheck. A quarterback who has managed late-game situations with entire seasons on the line, who has lined up in hostile road environments where the crowd noise alone makes communication feel nearly impossible, who has processed the very specific gravity of NFL moments where the margin between winning and losing lives inside a single decision made under maximum pressure. That experience has real, transferable value, and dismissing it because it's not as exciting as the shiny new prospect misses the point entirely. Having Cousins start while Mendoza absorbs the speed, the complexity, and the sheer, overwhelming volume of professional football from the position of a sharp-eyed observer rather than a thrown-in-the-deep-end participant, that is roster construction done with actual intelligence. That is how organizations protect franchise-level investments from being permanently defined by circumstances they were never fully ready to handle. But And I want to be very precise here because I'm not slamming any doors shut. I am not permanently ruling out a Week 1 start for Mendoza. The NFL has never, not once in its history, respected anyone's construction timeline. If Fernando Mendoza walks into training camp and is simply, unmistakably, undeniably ready, in a way that communicates itself without any ambiguity, across every single rep, in every single situation, then Kubach has to make the call that the evidence demands. Good coaches adjust to the reality developing right in front of their eyes rather than stubbornly defending a framework they built before they had the information they now have access to. This league's history is absolutely full of moments where the young quarterback nobody scripted, as a Week 1 starter was under center by opening day because the evidence was simply too overwhelming to keep ignoring. Those moments tend to happen to organizations that have built the right culture and hired the right people to recognize exactly what they're actually seeing when they see it. I'm not ruling anything out. I'm saying it has to be earned so completely that the decision essentially makes itself. And if you're enjoying this breakdown, genuinely, truly enjoying it, please subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell. Leave a comment. That stuff matters more than you know, and it keeps content like this coming. Here is my honest, specific projection for how this season actually unfolds. And I want to be precise, because I don't want the nuance to get buried. The Raiders make the playoffs, and Fernando Mendoza is a meaningful part of why it happens. But the version of that outcome I actually believe in is not the one where Mendoza starts Week 1 and immediately operates at a level that embarrasses every skeptic in the league from day one. The version I believe in is more grounded than that. And honestly, in some ways more compelling because of its groundedness. There is a real, traceable path where this season opens with Cousins providing professional competence and steady, experienced leadership, but not quite the dynamic, game-changing quality that separates a playoff team from a near miss. And then, somewhere in the middle of the schedule, the moment arrives. Mendoza gets his opportunity. And rather than flinching under the weight of it, rather than shrinking into the moment the way so many young quarterbacks do, he runs directly toward it. I have watched that exact story unfold in this league more times than I can easily count. And it never entirely loses its power, no matter how many times you've seen it. A team that looked like it was quietly drifting toward another forgettable, irrelevant season suddenly catches a completely different kind of electricity from a young quarterback who hasn't yet accumulated all the fears and hesitations that come with professional experience. That is genuinely, fundamentally what makes young quarterbacks with real tools and genuine football intelligence so dangerous when they land in the right situation. They haven't been told enough times yet what they can't do. They haven't absorbed all the cautionary lessons about which situations are supposed to exceed their current capabilities. They just go out and play with an unself-conscious confidence that becomes remarkably, almost frustratingly, difficult to scheme against. Mendoza entering the lineup mid-season, catching fire, and carrying this organization into the postseason while the rest of the conference is focused somewhere else entirely. That is not a romantic fantasy. That is a real, specific, football-grounded possibility. And if you've been following this build closely, you can see exactly why. Leave a comment below and tell me, do you think Mendoza gets his shot mid-season, or does he sit all year? I'm genuinely curious what you're seeing. Now, the pieces surrounding Mendoza in that scenario carry enormous weight, and the quarterback conversation absolutely cannot be pulled away from the broader context of what's being built around him. Brock Bowers is already operating at a level that creates genuine weekly headaches for every defensive coordinator in this league. There is not a linebacker or safety pairing alive that wants to spend significant mental energy tracking his alignment. His leverage coming out of his breaks, his ability to generate yards in open space after the catch. The gravitational pull he exerts on a defense creates openings for every other weapon on the field. And for a young quarterback still calibrating his reads against professional coverage for the first time, having a weapon like Bowers available as a reliable reset option fundamentally changes what the offense can attempt further downfield. That's not simply having a good tight end. That is a confidence-building resource that empowers a young passer to take the deeper shots because he knows exactly what's sitting underneath him as a safety valve. When the more aggressive option isn't there, Ashton Jetu adds a vertical dimension this offense has been genuinely missing. One that previously put a ceiling on what it could realistically ask of its quarterback. When legitimate deep ball threat ability exists alongside what Bowers creates in the intermediate and underneath game, defensive coordinators lose the comfortable luxury of sitting in predictable zone coverage with defined, comfortable positioning. They have to account for multiple threats across multiple levels simultaneously. And that kind of stress spread across multiple zones produces execution errors and coverage breakdowns that a smart, sharp young quarterback can identify before the snap and punish decisively after it. The offensive line functioning as a genuine, cohesive unit rather than a loose collection of individuals just barely surviving next to each other gives whoever is operating behind it the time to actually work through a real progression, rather than making reactive, panicked decisions under collapsing pressure. That protection changes the psychological experience of playing quarterback at this level in ways that never show up anywhere on a stat sheet, but reveal themselves on every critical third down situation when the game is genuinely, uncomfortably in the balance. The defensive construction deserves real, honest attention as well, and because I think a lot of people are severely undervaluing what is quietly developing on that side of the ball. Kubach did not treat defense as an afterthought to the offensive build. The acquisitions fit the schematic identity with real specificity rather than just filling roster space because the calendar demanded activity. A new defensive system in the NFL requires time, repetition, and the kind of genuine trust between players that only fully develops through shared adversity on the actual field. But by the midpoint of a season, if that defense develops along the trajectory its talent and scheme coherence currently project, this becomes a team that is genuinely uncomfortable, genuinely grinding to play against, in the very specific ways that decide close games in the fourth quarter when every possession carries maximum consequence. Defenses that make opponents scratch and claw for every single score, that hold their structural integrity when the game is tight and the pressure is highest. Those defenses win games that more talented rosters find ways to lose. That is the competitive foundation Kubach is trying to build. And the raw material to build it with is absolutely sitting in that building right now. Now, I want to address the biggest, most ambitious idea in this entire conversation directly, because it deserves serious, genuine engagement rather than reflexive dismissal. The possibility that Fernando Mendoza leads the Raiders to a championship in 2029 in Allegiant Stadium, on their own field, in their own city, in front of their own people. When I first let that scenario fully land, my instinct was to file it under pure passion talking, the kind of grand projection that exists more as emotional expression than actual football reasoning. But I forced myself to actually work through the logic rather than defaulting to comfortable skepticism. And what I found underneath the ambition is genuine structural reasoning that is absolutely worth taking seriously. Think carefully about what 2029 actually looks like if this build executes at anything close to its current trajectory. Mendoza would be entering either his third or fourth full season as the unquestioned starter, carrying the specific, irreplaceable kind of experience that only comes from surviving real professional adversity and genuinely growing through it. A coaching staff that has spent multiple years developing a precise, intimate understanding of his specific strengths, and has spent that same time constructing a system built around those strengths in increasingly sophisticated and creative ways. Brock Bowers operating in one of the most productive windows of his entire career, within an offense that has had years to fully understand how to use him across every alignment and situation imaginable. Draft capital accumulated through intelligent, disciplined current decisions, giving Kubach the continued ability to keep adding complementary pieces through multiple cycles. An offensive line with real, earned cohesion built through actual shared experience. A defense that has been reinforced through several years of intentional, identity-driven acquisition. That is not fantasy construction. That is the actual blueprint for how sustained NFL success gets built when a front office operates with real discipline and real patience over multiple years, instead of endlessly chasing the quick fix that always, without exception, ends up being neither quick nor a fix.